Silent Hill 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 2 and Halo Combat Evolved. That list is an embarrassment of riches, a selection of titles so strong that had they been released over an entire calendar year, you'd probably think it had been a pretty amazing 12 months. But they weren't. You might be shocked, staggered, or perhaps even aghast to learn that they all came out during one extraordinary 7-week period, and that is a big part of why I think 2001 is one of gaming's greatest years. Before we talk more about those titles and several others, all games I'd describe as genre-defining and/or revolutionary, I want to begin by running through 2001's best of the rest, releases which were perhaps not quite at the same level, but still deserve to be acknowledged. Platformers, once perhaps the most popular genre of them all, were quickly becoming less and less relevant. 2001, however, was still a vintage year, one of the genre's last. Conker's Bad Fur Day on the aging Nintendo 64 proved there was still life in the old dog, or indeed squirrel, with its mix of raunchy humour, excellent level design and movie references galore. It also received a relatively recent re-release as part of Rare Replay, and I'd highly recommend giving it a go, as its mix of cutesy characters and adult jokes is something quite unique. Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter The Precursor Legacy was also a brilliant maiden outing for the brand new franchise. In fact, I actually think it's a tad underrated. The interconnected world was a technical marvel, and its objective-based platforming was akin to a modern take on Super Mario 64, and I remain disappointed to this day that the series veered into action territory following the introduction of guns and a slightly more adult tone in later entries. Finally, there was Sonic Adventure 2, a game featuring some very entertaining Sonic and Shadow platforming and some fairly underwhelming levels involving the rest of the cast. The good bits more than make up for the bad bits, however, and I'd argue it remains perhaps the last truly great 3D Sonic game. Rest in peace, Dreamcast, I think about you every day. 2001 also marked the start of a number of Nintendo-centric series, as the company looked to capitalise on the release of its home console the GameCube and handheld the Game Boy Advance. Golden Sun on Game Boy Advance was a hugely impressive RPG which was not only a joy to play but punched well above its weight graphically to boot. It was an exceptional start for the franchise, one developer Camelot never quite managed to capitalise on. The little handheld that could was also home to Advance Wars, one of the best turn-based strategy games ever made, a title that proved hugely useful to 13-year-old Ben, who used it to while away particularly long car journeys. There was also Pikmin, released on the GameCube. Created by video game legend Shigeru Miyamoto himself, it is bizarre and brilliant in equal measure, as you take control of space explorer Captain Olimar and guide these sort of plant creature things through various hostile locales. That the series is still going strong decades later despite how intensely strange it is goes to show just how beloved Pikmin is. A couple of shooters hit store shelves that I also want to draw attention to, and it must be noted that back in 2001 we were yet to reach the genre's peak. While it was becoming more popular, it wasn't until the release of a certain game I'll be talking more about shortly, featuring a super soldier clad in green armour, that things really picked up on consoles especially, so it is relatively slim pickings compared to subsequent years. I think it's fair to say Red Faction is an average to decent FPS, but the destructibility it introduced was anything but. Creating alternative pathways by blasting chunks out of environments was genuinely jaw-dropping back in the day, made all the more impressive due to it being a PlayStation 2 title first and foremost. Return to Castle Wolfenstein's campaign was superb, but the reason it's made it into this video is because of its multiplayer. It is one of the best ever made, and that is a hill I'm willing to die on. The combination of a World War II aesthetic, class-based gameplay, and extremely well-designed maps made it an instant classic, and it's one I still jump back into every now and then, more than 22 years after its release. Accompanying the two shooters I've chosen to highlight are a pair of action-adventure games, one a sequel and one very much a standalone title. Shenmue 2 on Dreamcast continued Yu Suzuki's epic tale of Ryo Hazuki and the hunt for his father's killer, and it is everything you could ask for from a sequel. Bigger and better looking than its already astounding predecessor, it was the best sign-off for Sega's beleaguered final console you could hope for, and I was one of many who was over the moon to see the franchise revived with the release of Shenmue 3. Eco, on the other hand, is no sequel, nor is it like any other game I'd ever played at the time, chronicling the titular Eco's attempt to escape a castle with a princess named Yorda, while at the same time protecting her from environmental hazards and shadowy creatures. It is a true work of art which added unprecedented depth to what some might describe as the best extended escort mission ever. I can't finish talking about games in the amazing but not quite genre-defining and/or revolutionary category without mentioning SSX Tricky. Bursting at the seams with character and featuring gameplay to match, it took everything that was amazing about PlayStation 2 launch title SSX and turned it up to 11. It's without doubt one of the best extreme sports titles ever created, and the fact there's another which is even better is testament to just how spectacular the game I'm about to talk about is. It's now time to discuss 2001's greatest games, those I think were, at the time, the best in their genre, or which redefined what was possible entirely. We'll start with those which released outside of 2001's unbelievable 7-week stretch towards its end, looking first at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. The first two titles in the series took the PlayStation by storm, and for good reason. While they may not have always been the most realistic depictions of skating, they were immensely playable and hit the nail on the head when it came to representing the culture. Easy to get to grips with, but difficult to master, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 notably introduced reverts for the first time, allowing you to continue chaining your combo together after vert tricks, which added a whole new dimension to the game's mechanics. Add to that shiny new graphics courtesy of the new generation of hardware and some of the most memorable levels we'd yet seen, and it was no surprise Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was considered to be a true classic. I must confess, Devil May Cry is a game I cared little about prior to its release. It began development as Resident Evil 4 before becoming its own thing, and as a huge fan of Capcom's zombie horror series, I was rather disappointed. But I shouldn't have been. Devil May Cry was an action-adventure masterpiece, a spectacular romp which emphasised creativity and your ability to put down enemies in the most stylish manner possible. Indeed, your effectiveness was even gauged from dull all the way through to stylish. Demon Hunter protagonist Dante immediately became one of gaming's most recognisable faces, and him bursting onto the scene marked the start of a PlayStation 2 trilogy which is held in incredibly high regard. Super Smash Bros. Melee is one of the best examples of how to build off the first game in a series. The size of its roster more than doubled to 26 characters, packing in even more of Nintendo's most cherished representatives, and its gameplay was more refined than ever, with a quicker pace, the introduction of air dodging and the addition of more stages, all helping make it a clear leap over its predecessor. Over the years, the game has developed a large competitive scene which is still flourishing to this day, with tournaments taking place around the world on a regular basis, with its simplicity for spectators and depth for competitors making it a fan favourite across the globe. Here's hoping it's still just as popular 10 years from now as it is today, as its success is definitely well deserved. Final Fantasy was at an all-time high following a trio of huge releases on the 5th generation of consoles, and while the 10th entry in the series may have ditched one or two of their particularly popular elements, such as the world map, what we got was a role-playing sensation regardless. It was cinematic on a level I didn't think was possible. I mean, seriously, look at this absolutely gorgeous cutscene which occurs mere minutes into the game, and combined with its new conditional turn-based battle system and the inclusion of voice acting for the very first time, it felt modern in the best ways possible. It was ranked among the best games released in 2001 by numerous publications, and it's not difficult to understand why. It was, in my view, one of the last top-tier single-player Final Fantasy games to be released. It was an amazing year for the PlayStation 2 by any metric, as well as for one of its most famous series, Gran Turismo. Its third entry blew all other driving games away, and easily surpassed its two PlayStation predecessors as well, featuring unparalleled depth and attention to detail applauded by car lovers and gamers alike. The second best-selling PlayStation 2 title of all time, beaten only by Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, it was the series' pièce de résistance, a game so far ahead of all others in the genre that it left them completely and utterly in the dust. There's not been a whole lot of PC representation so far, but this next title more than makes up for it. If Devil May Cry showcased what was possible from an action game set in a fantasy environment, then Max Payne took a far grittier, much more mature approach. Taking its cues from 1999's cinematic tour de force The Matrix, its big hook was bullet time, which allowed you to slow down time to dodge bullets or dive through the air while mowing down every enemy in front of you. What it must also be remembered for, though, is its story. Its over-the-top action was juxtaposed against a dark film noir narrative which kept its audience on the edge of their seats, and there were few experiences in the medium which felt more like you were inside an interactive movie, an extremely good movie at that. At last, we arrive at the ridiculous 7-week stretch I touched on at the start of this video. While each and every title I've covered so far is undoubtedly a classic, I think this run of 4 games over such a short period might be the best run of releases in quick succession we've ever had. 2001 was already a remarkable year, but it's this quartet which in my mind solidifies it as perhaps the best ever. The first of the Fab Four to drop was Silent Hill 2, which I believe is still the #1 horror game after all these years. Silent Hill 2 didn't do anything overly special from a gameplay perspective. It was built very much in the mould of your Resident Evils and similar, with you exploring different locations, solving puzzles and fighting grotesque monstrosities, but everything else is frankly jaw-dropping. Telling the tragic tale of James Sunderland, who visits the town after receiving a letter from his dead wife Mary, it is a story of love and death and guilt which quickly seeps into every fibre of your being, made all the more harrowing due to basically every aspect of the game being designed to reinforce its themes. It's also positively terrifying from start to finish, and its soundtrack, composed by genius Akira Yamaoka, might just be the best video game score I've ever heard. From beginning to end, every aspect of the game comes together in perfect harmony to create one of the most horrifyingly cohesive packages available in the horror genre. It wasn't recognised straight away as being as brilliant as it is, but over the years its reputation has increased tenfold. If I were to make a list of my 5 favourite games, including Silent Hill 2 would be a no-brainer. Grand Theft Auto 3 was a phenomenon which permeated the public consciousness in a manner few games have managed to this day. I cannot put into words quite how popular and infamous it was. Pretty much every gamer wanted to get their hands on it, and most non-gamers would at the very least have heard of it. The funny thing is, I'm not convinced that many people expected it to be as revolutionary as it was. Grand Theft Auto, its expansion London 1969, and its sequel were all very well known due to the controversy surrounding their violent nature, but less so as high-quality gaming experiences. The third entry in the series, however, ended up exceeding expectations to an astonishing degree. Leaving you to traverse a gigantic 3-dimensional open world at your leisure, exploring Liberty City was one of the medium's watershed moments, with Rockstar affording you far more freedom than any other game on the market at the time. The world really was your oyster. If you wanted to tackle 3's story, you could. If you wanted to simply drive around, breathing everything in while enjoying the tongue-in-cheek radio shows, you could. If you wanted to tackle side missions, including becoming a temporary paramedic, you could. Whatever you fancied doing, Grand Theft Auto 3 had you covered, and it is, in my view, one of the most important titles ever created. If you're someone who stops by this channel frequently, you'll not be hugely surprised by Halo Combat Evolved's appearance in this video, but there's no favouritism here. Halo really is just that good. Introducing Spartan Master Chief, who would become Xbox's poster boy for many years, and a whole host of other memorable characters, it took the gaming world by storm thanks to its irresistible mix of fantastic gameplay and some of the most exciting levels in any shooter, on console or not. The FPS genre was one still in its infancy on console, but there had been a good number of attempts to match what was available on PC. None of them really succeeded like Halo did, however, and that's down to developer Bungie doing a top-notch job of adjusting things to cater to those using a controller. Sensibly designed controls and auto-aim made the lack of a mouse not really matter. The 2-weapon system removed any issues around switching between a million different weapons, and forced you to think more tactically about your loadout, and recharging shields meant there was less of a reliance on wasting time constantly hunting for health packs. Equally, the heady blend of on-foot and vehicular combat was unlike anything else in the genre. I've heard many PC gamers state that Halo did little out of the norm, but there was no game which did what it did, regardless of platform. Add to that sequences like the beach invasion during the Silent Cartographer's opening, or the reveal of the Flood in 343 Guilty Spark, and you had a shooter which proved once and for all that console was just as capable as PC. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty was the next-gen title so many were waiting for. The original, I think, is the PlayStation's best game, and so the hype surrounding its sequel was at a fever pitch from pretty much the moment it was announced, and the release of the fabulous tanker sequence as part of Zone of the Enders only served to increase excitement. Although there were many who were initially quite disappointed when Metal Gear Solid 2 finally came out. The tanker chapter featuring Solid Snake is unbelievable, one of the best openings in all of gaming, I'd argue, but once it was over, the arrival of new player character Raiden was not one that landed well with many. Gameplay-wise, the standard remained incredibly high, but for a lot of fans, the bait and switch by director Hideo Kojima and team was a bitter pill to swallow. Over the years, the game has been studied and critiqued extensively, and now we're a long way away from the initial shock of Solid Snake's departure as the main protagonist. The game is looked at in a whole new light. Where once the prevailing opinion among many was that the gameplay, graphics and interactivity were unrivaled, but the story was perhaps too much of a rehash, in the present that is no longer the case. Its commentary on the dangers of the digital age is an absolute pleasure to digest and remains as relevant as ever today, and combined with its other more obvious high points, there can be no denying that Metal Gear Solid 2 was, and still is, best in class. And with that, we reach the end of my roundup of the best of 2001, a year I think is one of gaming's greatest. Do you agree, disagree, or is there another 12-month stretch you think is just as good, if not better? Whatever your opinion, I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching the video, boys, girls, and fans of list-based content. If you enjoyed it, do consider liking, subscribing, and letting me know your thoughts, and hopefully I'll catch you all again soon.